They say Solomon was the wisest man who ever walked the earth, but few dare recount the price he paid for his wisdom. Within the golden walls of his palace lurked a world sealed from the eyes of the profane, a labyrinth of seduction, politics, and mysticism, where 1,000 women were not just wives, they were living pawns in an ancient game. There, in the heart of Jerusalem, flourished the most powerful harem in history, and behind every veil lay a promise of pleasure and a threat of destruction. It was a universe of bewitching perfumes, coal-painted eyes, henna-covered fingers, voices singing songs in forgotten languages, and dances that said more than words ever could. But what truly happened within was never spoken of from the pulpits. What was whispered between Egyptian linen cushions and shadows cast by sacred lamps was more than a ritual of seduction. It was a pact with power. Each night with the king was a silent battle, each caress a negotiation, each sigh a secret. Hidden in the folds of history, women of royal blood, priestesses disguised as concubines, spies from enemy kingdoms, all vying not only for the king's heart, but for the fate of a nation. And Solomon, the man who ruled with a sacred ring and heard the voice of God, shared his bed with foreign gods, pagan chants, and hidden intentions. If you think you know this story, prepare to unlearn, because the truth lay behind the linen curtains, where only the shadows saw all. At the end of this video, after you've glimpsed the secret rituals, the alliances made in the dark, and the games of seduction that shaped the throne of Israel, we'll reveal the harem's darkest secret, the mystical power Solomon used to maintain order between spirits and women. An ancient object forged with the sacred name of God, it would have granted the king dominion not only over armies and empires, but also over invisible creatures, ancient demons, and occult forces. This ring, mentioned in apocryphal texts and ancient legends, was said to be the link between the earthly and spiritual worlds, between pleasure and damnation. It is said that it was with it that Solomon interrogated dark entities, learned secrets of nature, and built with hands that were not human. And it is at this point that everything comes together: the harem, the temple, the secret altars, seduction, and ruin. Because perhaps the harem wasn't just a place of delight, but a spiritual battlefield, disguised as a fragrant garden. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear could rewrite what you believed about the Bible's most enigmatic king and the true origin of his power. If this story already caught your breath, imagine what still lies behind the veils. Subscribe now and leave a like before this secret is buried again. Jerusalem was still asleep when the first rays of the sun filtered through the palace's golden walls, and the dawn silence was broken only by the whisper of the wind through the stone corridors. The outside world was unaware of what was happening behind the Lebanese cedar columns, the mirror-polished marble, and the bronze gates that separated the king from mortals. Inside, time seemed suspended between the sacred and the profane. It was the 10th century BC. Solomon had inherited the throne from his father David, and with it the burden and glory of ruling not just a people, but a prophetic destiny. The construction of the temple was finished. The neighboring kingdoms bowed before his. Wisdom and gold flowed toward Jerusalem like an endless river. But it was in the harem, not on the throne, that the most dangerous story unfolded. In a hidden pavilion at the back of the palace, far from the eyes of the people and the priests, existed a parallel world, an inner garden where exotic flowers brought from distant lands grew, where alabaster fountains gushed perfumed waters, and where women from every known kingdom walked silently, like silken shadows. There were thousands of them. Some were daughters of kings, others were war tributes, and still others chosen for their beauty or intelligence. But all, without exception, were there for a single reason: to please the king. It wasn't a banal obligation, nor an act of love. It was an art. And each of those women carried in their charcoal-lined eyes and in their hands adorned with turquoise rings the awareness that their bodies were weapons. The harem wasn't just a place, it was a system, a machine where desire, power, and religion mingled in a dangerous dance. There was no room for naivete. Every smile was calculated, every word measured, every step choreographed, because being there meant much more than sleeping with the king. It meant influencing his decisions, shaping his beliefs, and earning the blessing of eternity through the seed of a child. For some, it meant the only chance to rewrite their own history. While the Levites chanted in the temple, other music echoed in the harem, softer, more sensual, more ancient than any scripture. It was there, amid Phoenician tapestries and columns painted with Egyptian pigments, that Solomon's true throne trembled, because sometimes kings bow, but not before armies. They bow before a perfume, a look, or a secret whispered at the foot of the bed. Solomon's harem was not improvised. It was designed as a labyrinth of domination and beauty, where each space revealed not only the opulence of an empire, but the refined psychology of a king who understood that true power lies not in the scream of swords, but in the silence of the walls. Built with the same geometric precision that guided the construction of the temple, the harem was an invisible city within the sacred city. Its towering columns supported internal domes painted with golden stars, reflecting the sky that none of the women there could touch. The floors were polished alabaster, cold as the logic that governed their relationships. There were no random corridors. Each wing followed a logic of hierarchy, origin, and function. On the upper levels lived the royal wives of noble blood and diplomatic titles. On the intermediate floors were the favored concubines. On the lower floors, the youngest, newly arrived or forgotten, trapped in time and silence. The air was thick with resins and incense, scents chosen not only for their fragrance, but for their effects on the body and spirit. The walls were painted with rare pigments: Tyrian purple, lapis lazuli blue, saffron yellow, each color evoking a god, a memory, an intention. Giant tapestries covered entire stretches of stone, not to hide imperfections, but to muffle the sound of footsteps, conversations, and decisions made behind veils. Secret rooms were hidden among false columns. Spiral staircases led to chambers not found on any map. Official scribes never recorded these spaces, but they existed, and they were used. In the center of the harem was a circular courtyard with a perfume garden. It was no ordinary garden. The plants there came from unknown kingdoms: spikenard from India, myrrh from southern Arabia, acacia from Ethiopia. The breeze was always warm, thanks to underground corridors that channeled the air and perfumed it with spice vapors. Nothing was random, not the weather, not the sound of water, not the positioning of the windows. Everything was designed to inspire desire, subdue wills, and manipulate emotions. And high above, on a hidden balcony, was the king's observation chamber. From there, Solomon gazed unseen over his empire of silk and sighs, an architect of bodies, wills, and destinies, because anyone who builds a harem isn't just building walls, they're shaping behavior, codifying power, and burying secrets where no one would ever think to dig. Each woman in that harem was not just a body, she was a flag hoisted in silence. An Egyptian princess did not enter the palace by chance. A Moabite woman did not sleep with the king without first signifying a treaty. Each concubine, each wife, each lover was also a diplomatic seal. Solomon's harem was in practice a foreign affairs office disguised as paradise. When Pharaoh's daughter arrived in Jerusalem, she brought not only her beauty, she brought a retinue of musicians, scribes, priests, dancers, perfumes, idols, and intentions. Her presence signified a strategic peace with the greatest power in the ancient world. Her bedroom was also an altar. Her conversations with the king, even in an affectionate tone, concealed clauses that the scribes would never record. Solomon's political alliances were not written with ink but with pomegranate lipstick and wine-soaked lips. Geopolitics was drawn between translucent veils and purple cushions. Sidonians, Edomites, Hittites, Ammonites, Arameans. Each represented not just a people, but a culture, a deity, a threat, or an opportunity. The woman was the conduit, the contract, the gift, and the price, and the king received them with reverence and calculation. The bed became a map, pleasure a code, pregnancy a conquest. These women knew. They were groomed from childhood for this role, educated in music, rhetoric, perfumery, politics, dance, and manipulation. They knew the exact moment to lower their eyes and the right moment to raise their voices. They knew how to feign fragility to dominate. They knew how to smile while sealing the fate of two kingdoms with a kiss. Some thought the harem was submission, but there, among cedar columns and gold tapestries, submission was the highest form of dominance, because the man who believed himself in control was also a puppet of carefully sculpted emotions. There were no armies marching into the harem, but alliances were formed, espionage organized, pacts sealed. In a single night, With a single woman, Solomon could secure the stability of a border or condemn an entire people to slavery. And no sword was drawn, just the right perfume, the right touch, the right word at the right moment. That was how the world went. Because in Solomon's world, power didn't come from iron, but from the carefully choreographed desire of women who knew exactly what they wanted and how to get it. Seducing a king was neither impulsive nor instinctive. It was a ritual, and like all rituals, it involved rules, symbols, time, and sacrifice. In Solomon's harem, the female body was treated as a moving temple, and before a woman could lie with the wisest man on earth, she needed to be initiated. At sunrise, when the chosen one's name was whispered by an elder in a white robe, the transformation began. She was taken to the house of purification, a secret building within the harem where the silence was absolute and the atmosphere almost supernatural. There, 7 servants awaited her. They didn't speak. They merely guided. First came the baths, 7 pools, each dedicated to a plant, an emotion, an element. Myrrh was for the skin, aloe for invisible wounds, spikenard for forgetting the past, cassia for opening desire, cinnamon to warm the blood, hyssop to purify the soul, and finally pure water which didn't cleanse the body, but prepared the spirit. Hair was washed with aromatic oils and combed with ivory instruments inlaid with amber and emerald. Nails were dyed with henna designs that told stories of love and power. Feet were massaged with goat's milk and honey. Every part of the body was cared for as if it were a living offering. Then came the perfumes. And it wasn't a matter of personal choice, but of ancient alchemy. The harem's perfumers, old mute women but endowed with centuries-old wisdom, blended rare oils with forbidden resins and essences. It wasn't a fragrance. It was a liquid memory, an invisible spell, a sweet poison. Each woman received a unique perfume, created to match her story, her intention, and her mission that night. Because seduction wasn't for everyone. It was for the king, and he knew better. The garments were almost ethereal, woven by Syrian hands with threads that resembled air and the color of moonlight. It was said that a well-prepared woman needed no speech. Her perfume spoke for her. Her skin revealed her lineage. Her eyes announced her plans, and her silence sealed the victory. The final stage of the ritual was led by the matriarchs of the harem, elders who had already been in the royal bed and knew what no scripture would dare record. They taught how to look without staring, how to touch without provoking, how to dominate without seeming, because in one night with one gesture, a woman could not only enter Solomon's dreams, she could enter eternity. What if the throne was decided between veils and kisses? Comment below. Which of these hidden alliances do you think most influenced Israel's fate? Solomon's chamber was not merely a resting chamber. It was an altar disguised as a bed, a sanctuary of pleasure where the sacred and the carnal touched without guilt, as if God and desire could breathe the same air. Located at the highest point of the palace, protected by 7 aromatic wooden doors and guarded by silent eunuchs, this room was accessed by only one woman at a time, and only after undergoing the purification rites that transformed her into a living offering. The walls were covered with hanging fabrics, dyed royal purple and embroidered with gold thread. The light came not directly from the fire, but from lamps hidden among cut stones that created a warm, golden twilight where time seemed to stand still. In the center of the room, a sandalwood bed rested on a black onyx bedstead. The sheets were Egyptian linen soaked in essences. Flower petals gathered at sunset were scattered in geometric patterns, not for decoration, but to direct the energy of the moment. In niches carved into the walls, hidden musicians performed songs with sacred instruments, bone flutes, silk-stringed harps, drums that pulsed like hearts. The melodies followed secret rhythms inherited from the chants of the Song of Songs, not as poetry, but as invocation. The music guided the body, but was meant to reach the soul. The air was dense, laden with incense, prepared with formulas treasured for generations: amber, acacia resin, benzoin, myrtle leaves, and a hint of something no one could name. Breathing in that environment was like losing oneself inside. Nothing there was accidental. Every fragrance, every fold of fabric, every ray of light had a function: to awaken the senses, erase memories, dilute desires. The woman, upon entering, was not before a man, she was before an entity, and Solomon, the king, the judge, the prophet, the writer of Proverbs, became there merely eyes, skin, and breath. Nothing was said immediately. Silence was the language of intimacy. A gesture sufficed. A movement suggested. A whisper concluded treaties that could last generations. Sometimes a concubine would depart in tears, other times in glory. But all knew that within that chamber there was no equality. There was a sacred order, the king at the center, the woman as offering, desire as right, and mystery as invisible priest. For in that hidden temple of wood, perfume, and melody, one did not sleep, one transcended. From the outside, the harem was silent and fragrant, but inside, it was war, invisible, subtle, relentless. A battle fought without swords, but with glances, without shields, but with soft words filled with venom, without blood, but with scars that burned in the soul. Those 1,000 women didn't just share space, they shared ambition. They all knew that true power lay not in being touched by the king, but in being remembered by him. And to be remembered, one must eliminate the others, not with violence, but with strategy. Alliances were formed in whispers, in baths, between veils. Sidonians allied with Moabites. Egyptians distrusted Edomites. Newly arrived concubines sought protection among the older ones, offering secrets, wiretaps, favors. The handmaids were the true agents of this Cold War. Messengers, informants, spies disguised as obedient hands. They carried messages, intercepted letters, listened in on conversations, and reported everything to their mistresses. A broken comb could be a warning, a stained veil, a threat, a switched perfume bottle, a trap. Gifts were constantly circulating, but none were mere pleasantries. A jewel signified submission. A rare fabric indicated an alliance. A plate of ripe figs could contain, in its sweetness, a sign that someone would be removed. And when a woman disappeared, whether through illness, exile, or simply loss of favor, no one asked. Silence was the most sacred rule. The most astute women knew that the throne was not accessible, but the king's heart was. And if they couldn't get close to him directly, they influenced those who could. Informal advisors, companions in nighttime conversations, voices in the dark that shaped decisions with words wrapped in affection and cunning. They knew which subjects made him uneasy. They knew the names of the kingdom's enemies. They knew the right moment to mourn a lost son or to praise a difficult decision. They knew when to speak and when to remain silent. The most dangerous weren't the most beautiful. They were the most forgotten. Those who, far from the king's eyes, observed everything. And they acted in the shadows, manipulating the flow of the court like silent ladies on an ivory board. Every smile could be a trap, every embrace a calculation, every prayer a disguise. Because in Solomon's harem, love was just a facade. The game was different, and those who didn't know how to play skis were removed from the board without a trace. No woman in the harem believed her mission ended with bedding the king. The true victory was bearing a child, not out of maternal instinct, but out of power. A fruitful womb was the key to eternity. Whoever gave birth to the strongest heir would not only secure her place in the palace, but would write her own bloodline in the history of Israel. That was why, silently and with delicate hands, each concubine tended her own body like a sacred field where an invisible war was being waged. Eating, sleeping, breathing, praying, everything was done with the ultimate goal of bearing a life that would belong not only to her but to the throne, to prophecy, to the destiny of a nation. With each birth, a new game began. The palace midwives, accustomed to secrecy, were reluctant to reveal the child's sex. The tension lingered in hidden chambers, and the news was only brought to the king when it was wrapped in symbols and expectations. A boy meant more than inheritance, it meant war, between mothers, between kingdoms, between ideas. A king's son was a potential throne, and the woman who bore him immediately became more than a concubine. She became dangerous. These children did not grow up together. Each was raised in a separate wing, under the watchful eye of their mother and carefully chosen tutors, often from different cultures, sent from the woman's homelands. While some learned the ways of the law of Moses from Hebrew scribes, others memorized Egyptian hymns or Moabite traditions. Multiplicity was encouraged, and with it, veiled chaos. Each mother desired her son to be the next king, and to this end, she shaped him with her language, her faith, her strategy. Childhood was a political preparation. Rehoboam, son of the Ammonitess Naamah, grew up divided between the precepts of the Torah and the charms of foreign religions. He was a prince surrounded by symbols, confusion, and invisible disputes. Other sons, not recorded by the official scribes, were likely removed, exiled, or eliminated. Succession was a battlefield where the weapons were invisible, but lethal. Mothers waged war with promises, offerings, alliances, and whispered threats, and the king, even aware of the game, allowed himself to be led, perhaps by love, perhaps by fear, perhaps by perverse wisdom. In Solomon's harem, lineage was a minefield, and every heartbeat of a child born there echoed like a prophetic drum, announcing that the future was already at war. No swords were drawn, but kingdoms fell silent. Do you think Solomon's greatest enemy was outside, or sleeping inside his own harem? In the beginning, it was simply tolerance, a diplomatic gesture, a concession to maintain peace between cultures. When Solomon allowed his wives to maintain their own rituals, he perhaps didn't imagine he was opening the door to a silent war between the God of Israel and the foreign gods that would come to inhabit the hills of Jerusalem. Each woman brought with her not only her beauty, but also her idols. They brought statues, songs, ritual vestments, portable altars, incense with ancient formulas, occult books, secrets of ancient priestly lineages, and with it they brought faith disguised as affection, worship disguised as longing for their homeland. In the harem, hidden spaces emerged where Isis was revered in chambers adorned with hieroglyphics, where dances for Astarte were performed by the light of lamps painted with dried blood and wine. The Moabites made offerings to Chemosh in the silence of midnight. The Sidonians lit candles to Baal on makeshift altars among the tapestries. The Edomites chanted prayers to Milcom with their hands covered in black clay. It was a babel of rituals and an invisible pantheon built with perfumes, intentions, and songs that the temple priests would never hear, but that heaven, perhaps, heard with regret. Solomon, the man who had heard God's voice directly and built the temple to heavenly specifications, began attending these rites with the curiosity of a lover and the vanity of a king, first as an observer, then as a participant, then as a builder. He erected altars to these gods on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, hills that had once served as lookouts for the Levites and now burned strange incense. Each altar was a silent betrayal, each sacrifice a crack in the sacred covenant. While the temple still welcomed the Levites with harps and psalms, the surrounding valleys began to echo with drumbeats, sensual chants, lunar celebrations, and spiritual orgies masquerading as devotion. The people, seeing the king's example, were divided. Some followed the old covenant. Others were enchanted by the new, the exotic, the forbidden. The prophets warned, but their voices were lost amid the perfume of myrrh and the dances of the harem. It was a forbidden syncretism, mixture that sought not union, but domination. In the heart of Israel, God's name was still chanted, but it was one name among many. And when the sacred becomes common, punishment doesn't come with thunder. It comes silently, like a seed of ruin planted amid veils and kisses. Night falls heavily over Jerusalem. The temple stands in somber silence. Where once God's presence pulsed in the Ark of the Covenant, now there is a disquieting emptiness. On the surrounding hills burn foreign incense, its smoke curling through the air like profane covenant-breaking prayers, mingling with the sacred aroma of the temple. Even the golden walls seem to sigh in lamentation. In the palace courtyards beneath the windows of the harem, chants echo in foreign languages. Silhouettes of veiled women dance beneath the moon, casting sinuous shadows. There is a hypnotic beauty in these secret rituals, a veiled sensuality in the soft laughter, the tinkling of bracelets, and the whispered prayers to foreign gods. Behind silk curtains, Solomon watches with a distant and weary gaze. Once he walked confidently among priests and prophets, now he remains motionless, torn between fascination and guilt, his faith already shaken. Outside, beyond the palace walls, the kingdom trembles. The people walk the streets with their heads bowed, whispering complaints. The gold of the palace and the temple exacts a heavy price. Rising taxes drain crops and the sweat of the people. In the bazaar, some lament the days of justice and wisdom, while others clench their fists at the fissures of the kingdom. From north to south, the ancient unity is breaking under a cold wind of division. Messengers bring the king reports of an exhausted and restless people, but his once sharp mind hesitates to find a solution. At dawn, Solomon awakens from uneasy dreams, the temple crumbling, the throne empty, and the crown rolling to the ground. He rises trembling, the weight of age bending his shoulders. Each step echoes. Through the corridors and the columns watch him in silent reproof. Once the wisest of men, he now whispers questions to the void. Where is the voice of God that guided my heart? In what mirror has my wisdom been lost? There is no answer, only the distant song of a night bird and the whisper of the wind through the archways. Neither the wine nor the caresses of the concubines soothe his anguish. He feels like a stranger in his own soul. At the window, overlooking the dark garden, Solomon looks up at the overcast sky. Only a pale reflection of the moon touches the ring on his hand. The royal signet, mystical and heavy, pulses melancholy against his skin, carrying within it the weight of glory and decay. He slowly turns the ring on his finger, sensing the unspoken secrets, the hidden power that has sustained his kingdom for so long. In the silence of the night, a veiled promise hangs in the air. Soon, something hidden within the ancestral ring will be revealed. As darkness precedes dawn, the exhausted king senses only the approaching outcome of everything, hanging from the pale glow of the ring. The ring gleamed on his hand as if it had a life of its own. Engraved with ancient characters, forged with the secret name of God, a name unutterable by impure lips, it was not merely a symbol of authority, it was a key between worlds, a silent alliance between the throne and the unseen. It was said that with that ring, Solomon had commanded winds, interrogated demons, and given orders to ancient spirits that inhabited the most hidden layers of creation. And with this power, he built temples that defied the heavens, wrote proverbs that penetrated the soul, and amassed riches that left kings and queens silent. But all power exacts a price, and every secret a burden. In the depths of the night, when all slept and not even the prophets dared dream, Solomon descended hidden stairs to a forbidden chamber. There, by the light of a blue lamp, opened only by him, lay the scrolls sealed in blood, texts that spoke of angelic seals, the names of fallen principalities, formulas for controlling matter and bending the will. Here the king was not a ruler. He was an apprentice to something greater, or perhaps something darker. He studied the secrets that men should not touch, and each piece of knowledge wrested from the beings of the abyss made his spirit more lonely, more fragmented, more distant from God. The same ring that had placed him above kings now weighed like an invisible chain. It was with him that, according to ancient legend, Solomon sealed 72 demons in bronze vessels, using their services to build the temple and his empire. It was with him that he heard names never spoken, recipes for healing and destruction. It was with him that he seduced spirits and lured the impure within the walls of the holy city. And while the people worshipped him as a sage, the heavens watched him as a king who had gone too far. At the end of his life, Solomon was not just old. He was a man divided, a throne between two worlds, a prophet who heard the voice of the Most High and then fell silent among the shadows. The Harem was silent. Foreign gods still whispered among the hills, and the ring still shone, not as glory, but as a witness of what was gained and of what was lost. If you believe that all power comes from God and that all wisdom must be guided by light, comment now. God's power is greater. If these walls could talk, maybe they would tell everything. That time tried to hide, but today you heard, not just a story, but an ancient whisper that has survived the veils, the incense, and the shadows of power. If this dive gave you goosebumps, if any phrase echoed inside you, leave your like as if engraving a seal in stone, and sign up because the next secrets have already begun to awaken. The story that is now appearing on the screen is even deeper, more daring, and perhaps more dangerous. Only click if you're ready to go through another curtain.